this child, William of Norwich, who was found dead in woods, and so on. So we find the first case of blood libel in Italy 150 years after this happened in England. So this agitation campaign, which started in 1290, ended up in 1294, and it has disastrous consequences for the Jews in South Italy, because at the end of it, half of the Jews were found to have forcibly converted to Christianity. Many fled, many synagogues were converted into churches, so many people were forced to continue to observe the Jewish faith in secrecy. It is at the end, however, of the 13th century and at the beginning of the 14th century that the geographical situation of Jews in Italy starts to change. Not only their geographical situation, I mean, where they were living in Italy, but also their occupational activity. Many of them lived South Italy, as well as Rome, because Rome was at the time in a period of instability. The popes were in Avignon, and it was a period of instability in Rome, so some Jews decide to leave. And they start moving in central and north Italy in order to specifically work as moneylenders. So this was, it is at the time that this starts happening. Why? Because they were encouraged by local rulers who gave the Jews the permission, it was often limited in time, but it could be renewed periodically, to establish a banco, which is not to be intended like normal banco today, a banco, in a certain place, which was basically money lending against pawn?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. In order to get around the prohibition of the Catholic Church that Christians should not lend money at interest to other Christians. They don't go to the big towns like Venice, Florence, Genova. You know, they had solid Christian commercial class, but they start to go to the small places where, you know, they needed the local population needed money, and there was this problem of the church, which was increasing its pressure on Christians not to lend to other Christians as interest. So not only we have a flow of Jews which from South Italy they start, and from Central Italy, from Rome they start moving central and north, but we have another flow that reaches North Italy from France and Germany, because foreign Jews start to cross the Alps and settle in the north of Italy, where they open these banks, okay, providing loans at interest. The first immigration from Germany, in fact, had started even earlier with the massacre which took place during the first Crusades in the valley of the Rhine and Moselle rivers. So they had great massacres of Jews in Speyer, in Worms, in Metz, in 1096. But we also have, again, the usual accusation of ritual murder in Fulda in 1230-15. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th century were a really difficult period for German Jews due to the multiple. There was the Crusades, there was the plague. You know, Jews were accused of poisoning the wells. All this. So they, you have this multiple accusation of ritual murder, well poisoning. You have expulsion. You have massacres. So German Jews come to Italy because they knew that the situation in Italy was better. In spite of all its limitation, it was incomparably better compared to the situation they had lived in Germany. They moved to the north of Italy, especially in the region of Veneto, Lombardy, Emilia, Piedmont, but also they reach also the Marche region in central Italy. The famous, for instance, Rabbi Yehuda Mintz arrived in Padua and opens a famous rabbinical academy. Another rabbi, Moshe Basola, becomes rabbi in the town of Ancona, and Rabbi Joseph Ottolenghi opens, in fact, a rabbinical school in Cremona. Now, I just mentioned three famous rabbis, so Mintz, Basola, and Ottolenghi. Are these German surnames? They were coming from Germany.
Ottolenghi was Ettlingen.
Exactly. Ottolenghi was Ettlingen. You know, The point, what I will show it, we'll show it more in detail later. When German Jews start coming to Italy, they maintain the name of the town they were coming from, but in an Italianized way. So Ottolenghi was Ettlingen, Basola was from Basel in Switzerland. Mainz, okay, this doesn't sound too Italianized, but it's from the town of Mainz in Germany. So, and they also brought with them later on, also for instance, the techniques of printing. You know, from the printing press was born in Gutenberg in Germany. So German Jews come with these techniques, and Jewish printing houses opened in the 1477 in Bologna, and the most famous one, 1483 in the town of Soncino. This family, in fact, trace its descent to a certain Moshe of the town of Speyer in Germany. They move from Soncino, so they settle in Soncino, they open a printing press, they move in other towns of Italy, but they maintain the surname Soncino from the first town they arrived into Italy. And they reach in 1530 Salonika and Istanbul, and there you have all this Jewish printing press in Thessaloniki and in Istanbul. So let's go back now to the moneylender issue. From the 13th century, some Jewish families, especially from Rome, moved to other places in central Italy first, and later on to the north, in order to establish some banks. Although we can say that the activity of loan bankers for Jews flourished in Renaissance Italy, or mostly in the 14th and 15th century. And this resulted in a major shift of economic activity for the Jews. And we see in the middle of 15th centuries, for instance, Jews which has opened banks in more than 300 localities in Italy, with sometimes members of the same family spreading around the territory to open local branches or subsidiaries of the first bank. Some families like the Norsa, the Pisa, they were specialized in this. So how can we explain this opening, this major shift in economic activity, and this opening of Jewish banks all around Italy? Two reasons, theological ones and economic ones. From the theological region, the church has always had, problems with money. In Italian, they call the Catholic Church called the money lo sterco del demonio, which means the devil's ship, literally. This was their attitude towards money, and they had always had a problem with the issue of Christians lending money at interest to other Christians. However, at least during the first days, they accept Jewish moneylenders because they consider that, from a theological point of view, the Jews, they didn't recognize our Savior, they are damned, they will go to hell in any case. So, of course, it was bad, the fact that they lend money to Christians, but less bad than a situation in which some Christian would have to do it because the Jews are not doing it, so the Christian would lose their soul, they would go to hell. And in fact, the Jews had, from the point of view of the Catholic Church, they had a function of avoiding that some Christian would go to hell, by doing these moneylender activities. Of course, against the permission to open a bank, they had to pay the church. They had to pay also the local authorities, but they also had to pay the church. But later on, the situation, but then comes into the debate the friars, the Franciscan friars. They start also not liking the idea of Jews lending money at interest, and this is where the so-called Monti di Pietà starts being created in Italy, which try progressively to push Jews out of business on the money lending activity. I'll come to this in a second. There was also economic reason, because of course money lending against pawn was a necessity. And in fact, in the 13th century, it was practiced by both Christian and Jews. The difference was that the Jews were asking for an interest rate which was considerably less than the ones which was asked by Christian. Sometimes they were doing it together. For instance, there is a contract of the town of Ascoli established between the town of Ascoli and a group of 22 moneylenders. 18 of these are Christian from the town of Rome, from Tuscany, and 4 of them are Jews from Rome. So in fact, Jews and Christians in the 13th century were associating themselves to lend money at interest. In Venice, the monopoly of lending against pawn is given as a monopoly to the Jews in 1366, and we see so Jewish money lending against pawn spreading all around Italy in the 14th and 15th century. They were called by local authorities. You know, it was local authorities calling Jews and said, "Would you like, please, to establish a banco here? We need money," and so on. So Christians were progressively led out of business, both because the Jews were more, people were going to the Jews because they asked for a lower interest rate, and also because of the pressure by the church. So some Jewish families like Norsa, De Pomis, Pisa established many of these bancos in different localities. But then the situation started to change again in the middle of the 15th century because of the agitation of the monastic orders, and first of all the Franciscans, although the situation was not homogeneous in Italy. Amazingly, the Franciscans leave the Jews of Rome in peace, relatively in peace. So we have, for instance, in the 15th century, 70 banks, Jewish banks in the city of Rome, you know, under the nose of the Pope, but of course the church accepted it for the reason which I explained before. And in the year 1600, we find 279 banks in 131 towns, so the number of towns has decreased, because these Monti di Pietà are established progressively by the Franciscans. Also, these Monti di Pietà have a difficult life anyway, because